The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
We don't want to go forward and then take a step backward.
Tonight on Politics Now, Nevada stays in Phase 2. How Governor Sisolak is explaining Nevada's increase in coronavirus cases and what has to happen before the state reopens even more. Plus,
several of the observers were actively engaged in the protests. These people were antagonizing and obstructing our officers.
6 legal observers detained by Metro Police. What both sides say happened during last week's protest. And Nevada has its official primary election results. The races that flipped in the legislature since last week and what to expect in the lead up to November.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Nevada is not ready to reopen even more. Thank you for joining us. I'm John Langler. On Monday, Governor Steve Sisolak said the state could not move into Phase 3 of its reopening plan. And one day later, Clark County announced its biggest day of COVID-19 cases so far. As Oracle Manna explains, this spike in cases is keeping Nevada in Phase 2.
We're not in the post-COVID time. We're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. We're right dead smack in the middle of it.
A strong statement from Governor Steve Sisolak as Nevada stays in Phase 2. That means no additional restrictions are being lifted.
We don't want to go forward and then take a step backward.
As the state reopens and more testing is available, we're seeing an uptick in COVID-19 cases as predicted. There's been an upward trend over the last 3 weeks and a consistent increase in hospitalization since June 5th.
Before expanding our reopening and entering a Phase 3, we must continue to allow ourselves the time to evaluate this new medical information.
With large crowds forming on the Strip and downtown, contact tracing will help figure out how people are contracting the virus. For example, in the casinos or at the recent protests. In both cases, there's little social distancing and sometimes minimal mask use.
Now is not the time to abandon these protective measures. It is a time to double down on them. We can only stay open if we stay safe.
Las Vegans we talked to are torn on the idea of waiting.
The governor's team, I think, are trying to do what's best, but I also think there are some long-term effects to keeping things shut down.
I feel like things do need to progress and they need to move forward either way, but I also understand staying in Phase 2 just a little bit longer.
Governor Sisolak says science will make the final say.
The virus is what drives the timeline.
Oracle Manna, 8 News Now.
Now, for some perspective on this, Phase 1 here in Nevada lasted about 3 weeks, and we're just a little more than 2 weeks now into Phase 2. Police and legal observers are sharing different versions of what unfolded at last Saturday's Black Lives Matter protest on the Las Vegas Strip. Police say they had to use force to block protesters from walking onto I-15. Legal observers say they were being peaceful, though, and the officers were heavy-handed. And now there's a question about whether one woman was thrown to the ground by officers. The I-Team's Vanessa Murphy is taking a closer look.
Belinda Harris wrote in a Facebook post Sunday she was thrown to the ground the night before at this Black Lives Matter protest on the Las Vegas Strip. Harris is a public defender in Clark County and running for judge in North Las Vegas. Now 2 police departments are saying what Harris is claiming never happened.
There were some very disparaging comments made on the internet, reference officers throwing a person to the ground and being very unprofessional, and I didn't see that in the video.
Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo held this press conference Tuesday after leaders like Governor Steve Sisolak, Attorney General Aaron Ford, and Clark County Commissioner Justin Jones raised questions about the arrests of legal observers like Harris last Saturday. Legal observers are supposed to be neutral, there to document police and protesters. Sheriff Lombardo called them antagonistic and showed several short video clips. The same day, North Las Vegas police released a 10-minute video clip showing Harris in custody and called her claim unfounded.
Okay, we're moving. Where are we going?
Not leaving.
We were walking. All right, that's fine. I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, go ahead and have a seat right here.
These are super tight.
The other officer will
Can you like fix them? Can you redo them and fix
Less than 3 minutes later, her plastic handcuffs are removed and replaced shortly after. In another Facebook post Tuesday night, Harris wrote in part, "Just as they targeted me then, they continue to target me now." Interestingly, Sheriff Lombardo decided to release the footage of me, a black woman legal observer, being arrested instead of my white colleagues. "I suspect this is because I am a judicial candidate and I will be the first black woman elected as a judge in my community." On Thursday at this press conference, attorneys for legal observers described police as heavy-handed. 8 News Now asked Harris's attorney whether she still stands by her claims she was thrown to the ground.
Ms. Harris is, what you don't see is the manner in which she's accosted from behind without warning, basically, and then perp walked, essentially, across Las Vegas Boulevard or across the street to a center median, where she is then intricately searched every pocket, her hair, and then put down on the ground. So if you take issue with the word throw, I think the video speaks for itself, and it shows what happened to my client, Ms. Harris.
And that was Vanessa Murphy reporting. Now, at last week's Clark County Commission meeting, Sheriff Joe Lombardo also addressed calls to defund police.
When we're talking about defunding police departments, a lot of the conversation is keying on those particular type duties that traditionally have not fail under the police auspice. In other words, mental health, homelessness. When a police officer arrives in those type of events, the attitude or the presence is elevated with the presence of a police officer versus somebody of the title, say, a social worker. And so I think a lot of those things need to be evaluated because over the years and the 20 years that Commissioner Brown alluded to, the resume of a police officer has become very expansive. We are expected to be experts all along the way with every one of societal ills that is out there. A counselor, a crime fighter, figuring out ways to get people fed, figuring out how to get people homes to go by. We've always said it for 1,000 years, our largest mental health facility is the jail, which is inappropriate. So those are the kind of things that I think this body and the bodies up at the legislature have the power and the authority and the intervention piece that could be very beneficial in how police are deployed and how they're utilized into the future.
So far, Nevada politicians have not called to defund the police. They have made some calls, though, for police reforms, and that might be addressed when lawmakers meet for a special session before the end of the month. As for other lawmakers in D.C., Congress taking up police reform bills themselves. Right now, Republicans and Democrats are drafting their own plans to hold police more accountable. As Raquel Martin from our Washington, D.C. bureau explains, Democrats say Republican plans just don't go far enough.
Just look with those cold, hard eyes as he took the life out of that man.
With the image of the officer who killed George Floyd now seared into his mind.
Something I'll carry for the rest of my service in life.
Illinois Senator Dick Durbin called on Republicans to join Democrats in adopting bold changes to stop police abuse.
This is our moment.
How many more people have to die in our streets to get us there?
Tuesday, Democratic senators insisted their Justice and Policing Act is the best choice to deliver changes protesters around the country are demanding.
The time should be now for us to make bold change, or we will be back here again.
But most Republicans caution the Democrats' plan goes too far. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley says he's sticking by the GOP bill.
Abuses must end.
And pointed to his state as a model for addressing the problem on its own.
It brings additional accountability to Iowa's law enforcement officers by creating stronger restrictions on the use of chokeholds.
Republicans will unveil their plan on Wednesday. It includes some of the reforms already in the Democratic bill. But it leaves out reforms to help victims sue the police, a non-starter for the president.
Police run straight into harm's way.
Earlier in the day, President Trump signed an executive order to ban some use of chokeholds, create a national database to track police conduct, and increase grants for training. Democrats say the executive order does not go far enough and are hoping to gain more bipartisan support for their plan. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
Republicans say qualified immunity reform may be off the table moving forward. Next on Politics Now, it is on to November. We're going to have some of the final election results from the primary coming right up.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
We have the final results and final turnout numbers from the June 9th Nevada primary. Across the state, more than 480,000 people voted in the all-mail-in election. That's a turnout of just under 30%. Here in Clark County, just under 314,000 ballots were turned in. That's about 28% turnout. So let's now check out some of the results from the last week. And we're going to start with the open Supreme Court seat. Open Supreme Court seat, I should say. Douglas Herndon and Ozzie Fuma will be in a runoff in November, since neither got 50% of the vote. This pits Herndon, a sitting district court judge, and former deputy district attorney Herndon against an assemblyman and a well-known defense attorney in Ozzie Fuma. Now it'll be a head-to-head matchup in November. The Democratic primary in State Senate District 7 featured two sitting members of the Assembly, Ellen Spiegel and Richard Carrillo, versus a former state party chairwoman, Roberta Lang. Lang was endorsed by the Culinary Union and former Senator Harry Reid. When we had the first numbers last week, Spiegel was in the lead, but now it looks like Roberta Lang has won. We also had a sitting assemblyman who lost in his primary in Assembly District 19. As you see there, Republican Chris Edwards lost pretty handily there to Annie Black, who is a councilwoman in Mesquite. Edwards had some recent criticism for sharp, insensitive responses to his constituents. We now know what the two congressional races in the more swing districts are going to look like here in Nevada. Both congressional districts 3 and 4 have been represented by Republicans and Democrats. Democratic incumbent Susie Lee easily won her race there in her campaign on the Democratic side. She's going to face Republican Dan Rodheimer in Congressional District 3. Looking ahead to November, District 3 has 15,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. Incumbent Democrat Stephen Horsford won handily in District 4. The Democratic registration advantage more than 38,000 in CD4. He's going to face former Republican Assemblyman Jim Marchant. There will be outside groups and a whole lot of money spent in both of these races. Danny Tarkanian finally broke through. He won a seat on the Douglas County Commission, as you see there, by just 17 votes. Tarkanian had lost 6 previous attempts at political office. Stepping down, the reason Las Vegas Councilwoman Michele Fiore gave for resigning as mayor pro tem. We'll have that next on Politics Now. Plus,
the U.S. Supreme Court ruled to uphold DACA. I'm Alexandra Limon in Washington. Coming up, I'll tell you why that doesn't provide a permanent solution for these young immigrants.
You're watching Politics Now.
Las Vegas City Councilwoman Michele Fiore stepped down from her position as mayor pro tem this week. It comes after she was criticized by other Republicans for allegedly making racially charged comments during the Clark County GOP convention.
I'm going to tell you this. We've had a lot of rhetoric and no resolve. I stand by what I said at our Republican convention. I'm going to tell you, what I'm not going to say is create more chaos by repeating it.
Fiore also did not directly answer reporters when asked if this recent controversy is the reason she decided to step down. Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman said Fiore does not have a racist bone in her body. The mayors asked that man there, Councilman Stavros Anthony, to become the next mayor pro tem. He's been in that position before. Fiore was also recently reelected as a national committee woman for the GOP. The I-Team's Vanessa Murphy has more on another move made by Fiore on Thursday involving a city resource.
Councilwoman Michele Fiore talked about re-electing President Donald Trump in a video titled Live from Access City Council.
I have 5 months to get Donald Trump reelected, and we're going to get 4 more years, like it or not. Americans don't like mayhem, they don't like rioting, and they don't like the ugliness that's happening in the world today.
Just last week, then Mayor Pro Tem Michele Fiore was accused of making racially charged statements by the Clark County Republican Party chair. Still, last weekend, she was re-elected by the Nevada GOP as the Republican National Committee woman. On Tuesday, she stepped down as Mayor Pro Tem. On Wednesday, she walked out of a Las Vegas City Council meeting after her history was addressed during public comment. And on Thursday, she said this.
Not anyone's agendized punching bag. As I go forth and review some of the comments that were made, I look at the people that made them and questionable characters, very questionable characters. So I will not participate in the circus show from yesterday of agenda item 68.
The I-team reached out to the city to ask whether there's concern about the use of resources in the video, including at least one city employee. Those are taxpayer dollars. A spokesman said in an email that discussions are supposed to focus on city-related topics and stay to that. Vanessa Murphy, 8 News Now.
In other news, the United States Supreme Court handed down several historic decisions this week. In one, justices decided federal law protects gay and transgender people from job discrimination, although there is one major exception, which is the military. LGBT advocates say Monday's Supreme Court ruling gives them hope the courts will use the same reasoning when deciding the issue of transgender service members. Hundreds of thousands of young undocumented immigrants no longer face the immediate threat of deportation. Last week, the Supreme Court also ruled against the Trump administration's decision to end DACA. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Alexandra Limon explains why, despite the ruling, these young immigrants are still in limbo.
The U.S. Supreme Court handed down a victory for hundreds of thousands of young undocumented immigrants.
I am overjoyed.
The decision removes the threat of deportation for now for people like Gabriel Hernandez, who are frequently called dreamers.
I was freaking out. I was like, if they decide tomorrow that this isn't going to happen, I've lost my ability to renew.
Hernandez arrived in the U.S. illegally when she was 2 and remains in the U.S. under the program known as DACA. The Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration's decision to end DACA was arbitrary and capricious. But this Supreme Court decision leaves the door open for the Trump administration to try to end DACA again with a different legal argument. The only permanent solution for dreamers would come from Congress. California Congresswoman Nanette Barragan says the U.S. House already did its job.
The Senate really needs to act. We got to get H.R. 6, the Dream and Promise Act, through the Congress so that the uncertainty will go away.
Republican Senator John Cornyn says he wants to protect these young immigrants.
DACA recipients must have a permanent legislative solution.
But Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley has his doubts.
We have an administration that is using every opportunity to inculcate hate and division regarding immigrants.
Senator Merkley says unless President Trump agrees, the Republican-controlled Senate is unlikely to act anytime soon. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
There are more than 14,000 DACA recipients here in Nevada.